Hey everybody, I would like to introduce Taimur Rashid for lesson from deploying Redis on Azure for enterprise customer.
Well, welcome everyone to the afternoon session. My name is Taimur Rashid. I run customer success for Azure at Microsoft, and really excited to be here. For the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk to you a little bit about Microsoft, the Azure platform, talk a little bit about our support around open source, and then during the second half of the presentation, we'll have Carl come and talk about running Redis on Azure and some lessons that we've learned in helping enterprise customers deploy on our platform. So here's the agenda. I'll take the first 10 minutes and talk a little bit about Microsoft and our support for open source. I think there's a lot that we've done over the past several years around the Azure platform and our support of open source that most companies and folks are unaware of that. I wanted to start off by just showing this slide, really kind of showing over the past 30 years the top 5 companies by market capitalization. And if market capitalization is anything that shows a company's influence and impact on the global economy, one of the things to see is Microsoft has always been in that. And despite the paradigm shifts around technology, from client server to web services to cloud computing, blockchain, you name it, Microsoft has embraced a lot of those emerging technologies and really helped empower companies and individuals around it. When you actually look at our mission as a company, when Satya took CEO leadership back in 2014, it's really about empowering everyone and any organization to achieve more. And the unique thing about this mission that it's very broad. It's broad in the sense that there's no technology mentioned here. There's no persona mentioned here. It's really about empowering every organization and every individual to achieve more in whatever they're doing. When you actually look at Microsoft as a company, we've rooted ourselves on this mission. And more importantly, we've taken a worldview, which is this worldview around intelligent cloud and intelligent edge. And when you look at the solution areas that we have across our cloud computing platform for Azure, infrastructure, applications, data, and AI, it is kind of the building blocks and the underpinning of the digital transformation most companies are aspiring to do. And whether that's really about driving quality consumption of their platforms and their services, to really give quality engagement around how they're trying to engage their customer base, we're well suited to really help customers digitally transform themselves as a business. And a part of that has been our cultural mindset. And so if you actually look at Microsoft from the outside, we've gone through a cultural transformation where we've really focused on a growth mindset, being inclusive about how we not only build products, but then actually take them to market, but then really being agile in responding to customer needs. One of the underpinning cultural aspects is our support of open source. And for those of you that don't know, Microsoft Azure loves open source. And when you actually look since 2014, the progression of our support of open source, you'll see various milestones. From 2014, our open support of Linux on Azure, all the way through supporting technologies like Hadoop. We joined the Linux Foundation back in 2016. 2017 was pretty critical in how we supported things like Kubernetes, PostgreSQL, MySQL, really looking at the opportunity for how do we empower developers that have these open source platforms that they're used to, but in making it easier to run on top of the Azure platform. And then through the course of 2018, 2019, we made some big steps. GitHub is actually part of the Microsoft family now. Citus Data, which is a Postgres company, we made them part of the Microsoft family as well too. And so Satya is very keen about look at our actions of the past, present, and future to really see how we are trying to bring a difference into the ecosystem and the companies that we support. And this is a great evolution of our support of open source. When you actually look at across DevOps management, the application layer, application frameworks, database and middleware, you will see our support of open source technologies. And if you'll notice there, Redis is also supported as part of our databases and our middleware. And we're really excited to be part of this conference and joining hands with the Redis team to really help customers digitally transform on the Azure platform and their inclusive use of all our services. This is a nice quote from Adobe. Adobe, which is primarily an open source shop. They have very little .NET, but yet they've embraced the Azure platform. And when you look at our ability to support multiple languages across all of our PaaS services, Adobe has really benefited from that because they have many teams that use different languages like Ruby, Go, etc. But our support of these different languages and open source platforms has really helped open source shops like Adobe adopt and leverage the Azure platform as best as they can. One thing to keep in mind, which we firmly believe in, that there's a flywheel around open source, and it is this flywheel around innovating, contributing, and enabling. And so if you actually look at the innovation layer, the innovations that we've done around Visual Studio and making it more accessible, at the same time taking all those different language supports and then putting them in the Visual Studio product. We've been known to innovate back to the Linux kernel. At the same time, when you look at our ability to contribute, we have over 5,000 Microsoft employees that contribute back to GitHub. And so there's about 2 million commits that we do. And so we are very active in our contribution back to open source. And then finally, we are very keen about enabling our developer ecosystem around the open source technologies that they use, our support for Postgres, MySQL, Azure Cache for Redis as well too, as well as the open API compatibility that we give our developers. And so this is just to sort of level set on our direction as a company, our embracing of open source, and our ability to really work with partners such as Redis Labs to really help customers digitally transform on the Azure platform. So that was my part of the presentation. I'll turn it over to Carl, who's actually going to get into some lessons learned and some feedback that we've gotten on how to enable Redis on top of Azure. So Carl, why don't you come on?
Okay, so my name is Carl, and I'm an engineering lead on the Azure Cache for Redis service at Microsoft. And I'm mainly here, I'll give you a very brief overview of the service that we have. And then I'd really like to go through some of the findings or learnings that we have from running a service at scale for a lot of large kind of enterprise customers and areas that we feel focus needs to be put from both the client side as well as from the Redis side. So basically what we own is a managed service in Redis. We host Azure on Redis, and it is fully compliant with, it is Redis, it is fully compliant with the Redis protocol. All you do is switch your application to talk to an endpoint, and you start talking to Redis in Azure. It is a dedicated service. So what we have is for every cache that you create, we have a dedicated set of VMs kind of assigned to you at the back end, which means that whether you use it or not, you have those VMs that are waiting kind of to be used. We make it very easy for you to be able to create, scale, and manage these cache instances. With a click of a button, you can basically scale your cache up or down in size. You can increase, connection limits. You can scale your cache in and out. You can turn on clustering, which will automatically turn on the clustering protocol and do all the hard work that you might have heard in other sessions about clustering and how complicated it can get to kind of manage a cluster and to be able to scale in a cluster in and out, add more nodes to a cluster, remove nodes from a cluster, etc. Of course, at the core of it, we have automatic failover. So any cache instance that you have comes with a master replica pair. And if you have a cluster, then you have multiple such pairs of master replicas, and each serving a certain set of key slots and keys within those slots. And if there ever were a hardware failure or some kind of a planned failover sometimes, because we do updates, both Redis updates as well as our service updates, as well as, let's say, OS updates. A failover is not a very uncommon phenomenon. So at a very high level, I mean, that's the service we run in Azure. And we have tens of thousands of customers, enterprise customers using our service and growing kind of very quickly. Redis is a very popular kind of open source product, and customers love it for low latency, high throughput scenarios. We find most of our customers either use it, for a lot of our customers use it primarily as a cache. So it basically, you put it in front of a SQL database, or you put it in front of a you put it in front of Cosmos DB or something like that in Azure. We find it being used very heavily in gaming scenarios. We have a lot of gaming kind of customers using our service. Another very common use case is in session state and output caching kind of scenarios, where people want to cache shopping carts, session state, output cache of their websites. That is another very common use case. So we have customers that are delighted with Redis in general. What we do find is that as you go on and on, kind of scaling your usage of Redis up, higher and higher, and your demands of Redis increase, there are certain scenarios where things start to kind of break at the seams, if you might, right? And that, those are a few things that I want to kind of go through, because you would have heard a lot of the other things around how people manage clustering and how people manage persistence. Those are all services that we offer. You can do RDB or AOF persistence and automatic backups and restore, etc. So let me get into those, right? I have like the top five things that we have, and kind of I'd like to go through that and kind of engage the community as well to see how they can help from both these kind of to benefit the community in general. So from the top kind of support categories we get, the first one we find is the way you basically use Redis is you have a persistent connection to Redis or connections to Redis, and then you go on doing operations to Redis, right? And then all of a sudden there is, let's say, a network blip, or there is a planned failover event, there is a OS update that happens, so there is a Redis update that gets pushed. And whenever any of these things happen and a Redis server actually needs to go down, or the machine needs to go down, even though you have a very fast failover mechanism where the replica can quickly take over as the master, your applications that have all these connections to the cache break. And when the connections break, this is by far like the number one kind of support topic that we kind of have in Azure, right? I mean on our service. And what we find it is basically a combination of things. Sometimes clients are not. Sometimes there are client libraries are not very robust in being able to reconnect very quickly, and customers need to do some work around that. Sometimes they do that very well, but there are still things that can be improved. And from that perspective, over here there is some room for improvement. I think in both from both the Redis server side as well as the client side. And let's say there was a way for Redis in its protocol to be able to notify clients that there was a failover that was going to happen, let's say a few seconds hence, right? Clients can then basically react to such notifications. Redis already has the pub/sub mechanism and could easily send a notification on a well-known channel to clients saying that, hey, I'm going to go down at 2 seconds hence, right? And clients can use that time to be able to basically do, they can make sure that existing commands are complete. They can start to queue up new commands and not send it. And then as soon as the failover time is over, they can basically, let's say, drop the connection, reconnect, and basically send those commands off to Redis, which will help in a lot of scenarios wherein customers today, their clients their applications basically just experience a connection blip, experience some connection timeouts maybe, and then experience a bunch of operation timeouts for commands that have been sent. Some of those commands have probably already made it to Redis server, but now the clients have no knowledge of whether they actually succeeded or not. And so you don't know what to do. A get can probably be retried in case of a set, or you're doing increments and things like that. It becomes a little tricky. You don't know whether you need to retry or what. So this is kind of one of the things that we feel that we need to engage more with both the client libraries as well as in all the various languages, and engage with the various client libraries to see how well we can implement something like this, right? If it came natively, if such a protocol came natively from Redis server, that would be awesome, because it would basically allow such scenarios to really happen in a much smoother manner. Going to the next, again, this is to do with client kind of configurations, right? So what we find is a lot of times client libraries are found. Redis has if you look at the redis.io clients page, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of clients listed there, right? And that's great. I mean, there's a client in almost every language today, right? So you can use it. The issue is that not all these are full-featured clients. They all implement. A lot of them implement things that people wanted to implement, a certain part of the protocol, certain set of features, and they just don't implement the rest. Some of them don't implement clustering at all. Some of them do, but don't reconnect very well, don't react to cluster configuration changes very well, some of them don't do periodic pings, for example. So if your Redis server has things like idle timeouts, and some clients don't do periodic pings, their connections time out, and then some of these client libraries are not very good at reconnecting very quickly. A lot of times we see customers have tens of thousands of connections coming from a client, and basically if there is a network blip or something like that, all these tend to reconnect again and again, and they kind of tend to create somewhat of a snowball effect, where they actually increase the CPU, actually start to use the CPU way more on the client side, and cause further issues for the clients to reconnect. And that's again, Redis. I mean, if you think of it this way, Redis is only as good as the client libraries, right? If your client library is not robust enough to do various things, your perception of Redis is that it's not good enough, right? So that's again, is another kind of set where another space, or where kind of we look to the community to engage, and we are engaging as well with various client libraries to do things. The third pattern we see is when customers use Redis close to memory limits, and don't leave too much room for fragmentation, and have a lot of fragmentation on their cache, and run too high on fragmentation. Consider that Redis is fine when it operates generally in that mode, except for when there has to be a failover and a full replication needs to happen while this is happening, and combine that with a high high number of high throughput in terms of writes, then you have bigger problems, because when you do a full replication, you need larger buffers to store the writes that are coming in, you need larger replication buffers to do the full replication that's happening, and then your cache is already highly fragmented. So something that managed services do is they have these reservations that they ask customers to set, so that you can deal with fragmentation, and you can deal with dynamic, probably trying to control fragmentation as much as you can. But that can cause a lot of issues if those are not, if customers don't set those correctly. We find that can lose, once an in-memory solution is completely highly paging, you have issues, very bad issues can happen. And then the final two to do with scaling, but basically on very large cache sizes, full replication can take too long. These are both kind of server-side things that Redis that we can probably do better on the Redis side. full replication can take too long on very large caches. Can take up to 15 to 20 minutes to do sometimes to sync a 60, 70 gig cache, and so for that we think that being able to do full in-memory replication over multiple streams, for example, would be a great kind of enhancement. We've seen other people kind of talk about this as well, but this is something we probably can engage more with the community. Cluster scaling is another thing where if you're, the way in which the migrate command works in Redis is it basically blocks, it migrates key by key, and if you have large keys, they can pretty much block both the servers, from where the export is happening and where the import is happening for long periods of time. And there are several threads on the Redis side about how to implement async migration or non-blocking data migration, and that is something that we are looking to engage more on that front as well. So that think of the Redis's event loop also kind of keeping track of data migration and doing data migration every so often when it's in between commands, etc. So it can actually very effectively do migrations along with serving up doing its sets and gets. There is already a pull request that somebody sent to Anti-Res, and he's kind of looked at that, and there are some comments, and it's been going on for some time. We see, but that's another space where would be useful to kind of have some engagement. So these are like the top 5 things. I just wanted to kind of go through those with the community in general to say this is what we hear from large enterprise customers on managed Redis services. Having said that, please kind of stop by our booth. We have a booth downstairs with a lot of giveaways. We also have a raffle, and people who take a survey and put their name into the raffle can kind of win one of these great things here. Headphones are pretty good. There's a pretty expensive enterprise subscription that you can get to try out, play around with Azure, yeah, I think this is the subscription offer, and that's all. Yeah, that's all I had.